Hey guys, Josh here from Rise and Grind Athletics with a nutrition Q&A taken straight from my Instagram page. So question number 1, in regards to nutrient timing. What is the optimal nutrient concentration to eat before training? Now that's a very fancy way of saying what nutrients should I be taking in before I train, so pre-workout nutrition. Pre-workout, I really believe in lean proteins and high quality low GI or moderate GI carbohydrates with a little bit of fat in there, so about 10 grams of fat thrown in with that meal. The fat is going to help with a sustained release of the carbohydrates and also provide you with some energy at the back end of your workout when you're really struggling to get the reps out. I believe that this comes into nutrient programming, so this isn't just looking at pre-workout nutrition but all-day nutrition, because if you want to be optimal as the question's asking, it really has to start from meal number 1, not just the meal before your workout. So what I mean by nutrient programming is what sort of meals and foods that we should be eating from meal 1 through to meal 6. And yes, I do believe in nutrient timing. I'm not so much with the if it fits your macros flexible dieting approach. I do believe that we can create an optimal hormonal environment which will help to fuel our training and our fitness goals. So optimal nutrient programming, in my opinion, you would start the day with proteins and fats for a meal. So an example just off the top of my head might be an egg omelette with some spinach, mushrooms, capsicum, onion if you like it, and maybe some avocado. So there's plenty of high quality protein as well as healthy fats. This is a massive caloric consumption to have first thing in the morning, and it's something that's definitely going to set you up to fuel your day. Not only this, but it's going to keep our cortisol elevated, which is a good thing in the morning. We are supposed to start off our day with high levels of cortisol, which rhythmically decreases throughout the day. So this is what our body wants. This is part of our circadian rhythm, and we shouldn't change this. The second benefit is that we're going to stay insulin sensitive. So you're not getting that insulin spike first meal in the morning, you're delaying that release. So your body becomes quite sensitive to the hormone, which we can then use to our advantage around our workout. So with our peri-workout nutrition, we can really take advantage of insulin. So this starts from meal number 1. So have your protein and fats. The second benefit of this is a term called metabolic flexibility. It leads to metabolic flexibility. And what metabolic flexibility is your body's ability to choose which nutrient it wants to use for fuel at a certain point in the day. So for example, if you've had your fats for your first meal and then you bring in carbs later on, when you do go to exercise, your body can choose whether it wants to fuel that exercise with the fats or the carbohydrates. So it's got that metabolic flexibility. It can choose its own fuel or choose its own adventure. If you start off your day with carbohydrates, which is very common, especially in the Australian diet with Weet-Bix and toast and cereal and all that jazz, your body is basically programmed to just fuel off carbohydrates for the day. So you might eat fat later on in the day, but you're not going to be able to use that as efficiently for fuel. You won't have that metabolic flexibility, so your body just knows to burn the carbohydrates and to keep the fat as fat rather than energy. So a study out of Molly Bray's lab in 2010 confirmed this. They had 2 distinct groups. One group that had a meal that was high in protein and fats for breakfast, and one group that had, I think, bagels with cream cheese or something like that. So a really high carbohydrate meal. Their total calories, proteins, fats, carbs, so macronutrients were controlled throughout the day. So both groups ate the same amount. The only difference was one group had the protein and fats for breakfast, the other group had protein and carbohydrates. What they showed was the protein and fats group stayed insulin sensitive. They had better quality workouts, so they had a higher amount of energy during their workouts, and they were metabolically flexible, so their body could choose carbohydrates or fats. The group with the carbohydrates and protein for breakfast, they kind of crashed during their workouts. They weren't insulin sensitive and they weren't metabolically flexible. So for the people who think you can eat whatever you want so long as it fits your macros, here's some proof in a study that your optimal internal hormonal environment won't be reached if you're just trying to fit your macros and not paying attention to proper nutrient timing protocols. So start your day with protein and fats. Pre-workout you want lean protein, quality moderate to low GI carbohydrates, a little bit of fat. During your workout, if it's a long workout, you can add some carbohydrates, especially for the people that want to train 90 minutes to 2 hours, maybe 30 grams of carbohydrates at the midpoint in your workout, mixed with some amino acids, really good to quickly refuel and provide the glycogen stores with that little bit more fuel for contraction and for fueling a strong workout. You don't want to burn off in the second half of the workout. And then post-workout, this is where I like your high GI carbs mixed with some lean protein, and I would avoid fat in this stage. So now that we're really insulin sensitive, it's time to spike your insulin levels and fuel the recovery process. Insulin as a hormone is designed to drive nutrients or shuttle nutrients into cells. It acts as a nutrient Uber driver. So we need carbohydrates with this process, as well as the lean protein, because we're trying to shuttle those lean proteins into the damaged muscle cells to fuel that recovery process. And recovery is essential for growth. We're not going to grow if we can't recover from our workouts. Added on top of this, creatine is great for nutrient shuttling, and it's great for cell volumization and swelling. Alpha lipoic acid as a supplement can also help drive this shuttling process. I would avoid fats in this meal because it can slow down digestion. So if you're trying to get those carbohydrates and proteins back into the cell ASAP, fats are going to slow down this process. So leave them for the post-workout meal. So you can go through a shake, so some carbohydrates, protein shake with creatine, and take an alpha lipoic with that. Or you can get it from a meal. So some high GI quality carbohydrates like your basmati rice mixed with a lean protein source like white meat chicken or eggs, egg whites if we're trying to avoid those fats. And yeah, obviously some veggies too. Nothing that's too low GI or full of fiber, because that will slow down digestion. So I like a little bit of spinach, a little bit of carrot, a few veggies in there for your vitamins and minerals to replace your micronutrients, but nothing too heavy until the following meals. Question number 2. How do we stop the release of cortisol if it is known to store fat around the abdomen? So I guess there's 2 real answers to this question. A, you can't completely stop the release of cortisol. And B, you don't want to. It's actually quite a good hormone for you. Our body needs to release cortisol. As I said in the last question, we do have that normal circadian rhythm. So we start off with our cortisol levels quite high, and they'll start declining throughout the day. So when they're at their lowest is when we can go to sleep. Cortisol is actually a fat burning hormone. A lot of people think that cortisol is just released and burns muscle and stores body fat. Cortisol does break down tissue, yes, but it's not specific to muscle or fat. It's just catabolic. So catabolic means the breaking down, and it can be breaking down to muscle or fat. We do need cortisol to burn fat. When cortisol becomes a problem is when it's constantly elevated. And this happens through chronic stress, just day-to-day life, mental stress, physical stress, emotional stress. Any stress causes a constantly elevated rate of cortisol. When cortisol is constantly elevated, we actually become cortisol resistant. And it's when we are cortisol resistant that we do start to store body fat. Yes, generally lower abdomen, but as I said, cortisol is not a bad thing. We do need it. If you want to block or shut off cortisol, you can eat a meal that is high GI or a meal that is very insulinogenic. So white rice, white potato, sweet potato, pastas, cereal, even some fats like coconut oil, your MCT oils, and some lean proteins, like especially whey protein. These can all cause the release of insulin, and when insulin is active, we kind of cut off or block off that cortisol release. Obviously, if you're trying to shut off cortisol all day, you're going to constantly need to elevate your insulin, which is going to come with a wealth of problems. So we don't want to do this. And if you're constantly doing that, you're going to store a lot more body fat than what cortisol is capable of. Insulin is a storage hormone, so insulin is capable of storing fat. So you would rather have cortisol a little bit higher during the day and drop down than you would like insulin to be constantly going up and down. So cortisol is not a bad thing. If you do want to shut it off, like if you have really high levels of cortisol in the evening when you need cortisol to be low, so that's unnatural, then introduce a carbohydrate meal closer to bed. So when that insulin release happens, that cortisol will block off, your levels will drop down, and you'll actually be able to sleep. So I really like carbohydrates before bed. I feel like they give me a better quality of sleep. And you also use them as fuel the next day. You're not just going to store all those carbs as fat just because you ate them at night time. They will stay in your system, and you can use them as fuel, especially for people who like to train early. It's a really good idea for you guys. All right, and question number 3, which is the last question for you guys, and we'll just keep it a little bit more basic and simple on this one. It's about caloric balance, so it's asking if every meal that we consume should be the same amount of calories or should contain the same foods so that we're getting just a constant flow of those exact nutrients. The answer to that is no, you don't need to have that specific calorie balance. So you don't have to eat exactly 400 calories in meals 1 through to 5 or through to 6 or however many meals you're eating in that day. If your goal is fat loss, at the end of the day, you just need to be in a caloric deficit from healthy foods. So still not an advocate of if it fits your macros unless you're fitting them with healthy foods. But yeah, a caloric deficit is needed to lose fat, and a caloric surplus is really needed to gain some muscle. So slight caloric deficit and surplus is what I recommend, so that you can do it over time and not all at once. It's much healthier that way, in terms of your homeostatic or internal environment and your hormonal release and response. Also, eating the same foods at every meal I don't recommend, because you'll be getting the same amino acids, the same micronutrients, the same macro concentration each and every time. And I think the body, you need to rotate your sources. So you need to have a variety of colors, so that you can get a variety of micronutrients, and a variety of protein sources so that you're getting a different amino acid profile each time. Just eating chicken all the time, you will be missing out on some key aminos or strong levels of certain aminos that we get through beef or through fish or through pork or whatever it might be. So you need to constantly rotate your sources. The other thing is, if you're constantly eating, let's just go with chicken again. If you're eating chicken for every meal, eventually you'll become quite sensitive to it and it will make you quite sick. So just for the sake of your gut health, make sure that you're rotating your sources of food. And it's not just for your proteins. This includes your fats, your carbohydrates, and your micronutrients again. I guess one benefit of eating meals that were roughly the same size and spread throughout the day is for your digestive health. So if you're only ever trying to break down those smaller meals, it's much easier for your system to process those than it is to process really big meals and then really small meals and then really big meals. You won't have that constant backlog of food in your system which you're trying to process. I do, however, think that we should have differences in meal sizes, just because there are certain times of the day, like mid-afternoon, where you might have those gap filler meals where it's okay to just have that smaller meal just to increase your protein, carbohydrate and fat intake for the day, and just to tide you over between, say, lunch and dinner if you're on the go. I also don't really, if you are having big meals for 6 meals of the day, like if you're really trying to put on weight, I don't really agree with having a massive meal right before you train, or a massive meal like immediately after training. I think you do have to have a bit of a break there. So a smaller meal, pre-workout, your shake like we described in the last answer, and then maybe a bigger meal there. So I think strategically we can shape our meal sizes around training and just around our daily schedule. Alright, so that concludes the Q&A nutrition video. If you have any other questions, feel free to contact me on Instagram or Facebook. And if I don't answer it in a video, I'll definitely get back to you just through message correspondence, because this is what I love doing. If I can help you with just a little bit of information, I feel like my job is done. Thanks, guys.